Why don't we get into it? So welcome everybody. My name is Rita Yelda. I am the Outreach and Communications Manager for the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed. I'm so excited to be meeting with all of you today to talk about our watershed-wide planning work plan for 2021. This is our final work plan meeting. Thanks to everyone who has taken part in them. It's been really helpful to hear from all of our member organizations to make sure that our work plans for this coming year are really in depth and going to be impactful. So today we're going to be talking about the watershed-wide planning work plan. So just a few bits of housekeeping before we get started. So if you feel comfortable, you can feel free to indicate your pronouns in your Zoom name. So you can rename yourself by finding those three little dots in the corner near your name. I'm going to put in my pronouns right now. And then so this call is also being recorded, so you can feel free to insert questions at any time into the chat box. The chat box will be saved. Just a friendly reminder that if you're not speaking, to leave yourself on mute. And with that, thank you again for joining our inaugural work plan development meetings. So this is the first time we're co-creating our work plans with members, and we're thrilled to do so to be able to foster inclusivity and transparency within our processes. Today's meeting outcome is to adjust our 2021 watershed-wide planning work plan based on your ideas and feedback. So this work plan will help guide what our staff and work groups focus on and will assist in prioritization. So your input today is critical. And we're hoping to have a discussion throughout the call today, so feel free to chime in. You all should have received the Word document attached to an email that was sent out prior to this call. That is our draft watershed-wide planning work plan that we'll be working off of today. Kelly is also sharing it on the screen, so you can look at it there. In terms of process for today's call, we'll hear from the organizations that will be leading the work on each of our priority areas, and then they'll provide a summary of the objectives and activities, and we'll open it up to some dialogue. So some questions to consider as we go through these objectives are there any other activities that we want to prioritize in the work plan? Are we missing anything? Do we want to collect input on the work plan from other partners? Is somebody missing from the work plan, so a type of group or somebody whose input should be heard but hasn't been heard? And how can we be more inclusive and equitable? So we'll also put these questions in the chat box. And now let's take a look. Ooh, okay, great. Thank you, Sandra, for putting the questions in the chat box. So let's take a look now at objective 1. So essentially, this is our first objective here is to engage and include stakeholders that are not currently involved with the coalition. Okay, so let's spend some time on this. What we have so far is to seek opportunities for collaboration with other Delaware River watershed-wide partnerships. 5 groups serving urban communities of color and non-urban groups serving communities of color. So doing outreach to them, doing outreach to 5 rural groups, 5 NGOs that intersect with conservation who have been underrepresented in our efforts, such as public health, education, and social justice. Establish a business advisory committee to engage at least 20 partners from the business community. And then 10 trained constituents to attend legislative meetings and annual State House education events. So those would be volunteers. So I would love to hear from you all. Feel free to type in the chat box or unmute yourself. And let's think about those questions. Oh, looks like we got something in the chat box here. Perhaps language in which we are looking for collaboration with organizations that are POC led. Okay, yeah. So like just adding in, yeah, POC led organizations, collaborating with, yep. Okay. Oh, that's a good question, Alex. So Alex asked, what does the engagement look like in the Business Advisory Committee? Sandra, I don't know if you want to take that, but I can also send along the link. We did create a Business Advisory Committee webpage that sort of outlines everything that would be entailed if you were a business signing on to our Business Advisory Committee.
Yeah, thanks, Alex, for asking that. So our Business Advisory Committee is really new. We launched it in late November. Thanks, Rita, for dropping the link in there. And the idea is, it was really launched out of several folks from the business community, including Princeton Hydro and PSE&G, reaching out to us and asking, hey, I really want to get involved. I know CDRW's membership is only open to nonpartisan, non-governmental NGOs. How can, is there a way for private companies to get involved? And so we started thinking about it and, formulated this advisory committee. The main goal of the advisory committee is really to help kind of matchmake NGOs with potential match dollars for the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund. It hasn't been kicked off entirely yet. We haven't had our first meeting yet. We're kind of still in outreach mode to get folks to self-select to join this. And you can see kind of the nitty gritty and the link that Rita put in the chat. But essentially, we're really hoping that this can produce more, match dollar capacity for organizations that may be struggling and create partnerships, but the advisory committee will essentially, provide a forum for partnerships that are outside of our normal NGO to NGO. So I hope that clarifies it a little bit. And thanks, Kelly, for putting the notes in there.
Awesome.
And if folks know of any, businesses that might be interested in joining this effort, feel free to reach out to any of our staff. I see Richard Lawton's on the phone too, and we've been in close coordination with Richard with the New Jersey Sustainable Business Council and coordinating efforts between the Delaware River Watershed's Clean Water is Good for Business campaign that's steered by the American Sustainable Business Council, and trying our best not to duplicate efforts. So, that's all I'll say about that for now, unless folks have any other questions.
Kristen has a suggestion in the chat about connecting with Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission.
Yes, we have. Yeah, we talked to Patty about this. Thanks, Kristen.
Cool. All right, what are folks' thoughts? Just to go back to this, our first objective here. What are folks' thoughts? Is there anything else that is missing? Anything else that we could do better or improve? Is there any voices that are missing? Okay, there's a comment in the chat box. Pre says, I really like considering 5 NGOs that intersect with conservation, the non-traditional partnerships. Are there any in mind already?
We're definitely in list building stages right now, but this is kind of, looking ahead to the next year. If folks do have relationships or ideas about any, specific NGOs, feel free to pop them in the chat. We can definitely take note of it. And, we'll just continue in terms of, and I saw, Alex, your question about clarification. So let me see. Kelly, can you go up just a tad? Thank you. So 2, 3, and 4 conduct outreach, 5 union members. So yeah, it's a little bit of both. So, the recruitment efforts and outreach and re-engagement to members as well. And just trying to cast that larger net to make sure that we're being as inclusive as possible. So making sure these, the first bullet is really the broad, the broad bullet for having the coalition serve as the convener. The next 3, 2, 3, and 4 are really making sure that we're hearing from those types of groups, that we're bringing them into the fold. And then the last 2, establishing the business advisory committee, falling under this broader tent of engaging and including stakeholders, and then the constituents being the last one. So I hope that helps. Are you connecting with state and federal agencies working in the basin? Thanks, Carol. Yeah, so so on the federal side, we do work really closely with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That's really our main one. Ever so often, we do communicate with NRCS. State agencies, yes, and state agencies are a part of our state-based work plans, which Kelly is facilitating next week, right, Kelly? So that engagement and participation will be specific to like those state-based conversations, if that's helpful. But always more that we can do. So if folks have any like specific ideas or partners that we should be engaging, we're just trying to make sure that we're really being inclusive and engaging folks to continue, the coalition being seen as this convener and really connecting the dots between partnerships.
Jen has a really good question in the chat. She says, are there any particular geographies or legislative districts where we need members? So that might be something to include in objective. One is thinking about what legislative districts or geographies are key to our success and that we could also help with. All right. Okay, there's a comment from Linda. Linda says several Alliance for Watershed Education Centers are members of CDRW. So there may be some ways we can all align and collaborate. That's such a great idea. Yeah. To do some kind of collaboration with the education, the nature centers.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. And if folks feel comfortable taking themselves off mute, you're more than welcome to do so. We can have more of a conversation if folks are comfy. Yeah, we're really excited to get more involved with the Alliance for Watershed Education and also connecting the dots when it comes to the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, DRWI as well. We've started partnering a little bit with the Alliance this past November. We issued environmental justice re-grants to 4 Alliance for Watershed Education centers, and those were TTF, the Tacony Frankfurt Watershed Partnership. I have to tell Julie, their name is too long. Also Berks Nature, Delaware Nature Society, and Bartram's Garden. And the idea in partnering with these 4 Alliance for Watershed Education Centers is really to information gather about what their community members' needs and wants are as it relates to the environment. So it's really a pilot project in terms of like how can we really learn from the community and hear what they actually want to work on, and then in terms of phase 2, really developing an advocacy campaign related to those issues of concern. So still very much in its infancy stages of, it's really an information gathering pilot project right now, but a lot more that can be done with the Alliance and DRWI. And I know both of those other watershed partnerships are thinking the same. So a lot more to come with that.
Well, and I'll also just point out that we in Penn Foundation does a lot of funding for us, and they're really happy to see us collaborate with other coalitions that are in the area. There's a lot of overlap in what we're doing, and we do the education and stewardship stuff. So, we're kind of with the people. I think it would be great.
Absolutely. Thanks, Linda. And thanks, Angie. I see what you dropped into. Excellent.
Hey, Sandra and Rita.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Richard Lawton with NJSBC. I just, one question is, urban farms. And I know that we have, as part of the coalition, Rodale Institute, we also have some businesses like Hugo New Corporation. Dominic Lukenhoff used to be with DPA. And she's really involved in environmental justice, especially urban farming in those communities. I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity, if it's not already in place, where there's places of intersection or overlap, we can kind of focus on getting more involved and advocating for the expansion of urban farming in the watershed and especially in the EJ communities, and training, apprenticeships, training, and encouraging the expansion of healthy urban farms.
It's a really cool idea, Richard. I'd love to talk with you offline about that and see if, like, what the coalition's specific role could be in terms of like sharing information now, maybe connecting the dots. We also have like the blog site on our website that Rita manages that, you know, if Rodale wanted to get engaged that way, that would be pretty cool.
And they might be on the call. We'll have our steering committee call coming up pretty soon in February. So I think Dominic Lichtenhoff, who I mentioned, will be on the call, is hopefully Rodale as well. So maybe we can kind of talk about that then as well, or another time offline as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Richard. Okay.
Question about the 5 rural groups, outreach to 5 rural groups. And maybe it's just, I don't know if there's more explanation to that one. Is there, I'm just not exactly sure what that means. You know, we do a lot of work in a rural area. Does that mean 5 new members that you're looking for, or groups as in, I guess I'm just unsure what that means, because it seems like many of the people that we might try to do some new outreach to, they're not necessarily engaged with a particular group. So I'm trying to sort through that in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this objective, it keeps it pretty loose. It looks like it's engage and include. So there's a few different ways that we could do that. We could, if there was a formal group, we could ask them to join. But if there's not a formal group and they're organized in some other way, you know, as long as we can engage with them and, you know, have them be part of, you know, what we're working on, or help them out on what they're working on, or collaborate in some way. I think that's what we're looking for here. So it may not necessarily be membership, but it'd be great if it was membership and if there were some organized rural groups, but I understand that might not always be the case.
It seems like it might be worth thinking about. Sorry, this thought is not very well formed, but just, you know, how do we engage people that aren't part of a group, you know, sort of like grow knowledge base and get people to join groups, form groups, things like that, that it seems like to some extent there's kind of a void on some of that now. So anyway.
Yeah,
Just
getting people to step up and be organized and care about issues. Yeah. Good idea. It looks like we have a question from Dave in the chat. Have you reviewed William Penn Foundation's DRWI Watershed-wide Organizations Directory? I haven't heard of the directory. I don't know if Sandra or Kelly has heard of it, but I've not heard of this.
Dave, I have heard of it. I don't think I have access to it, if it's publicly available or just available to DRWI folks.
I'll send that to you guys.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, Kristen.
Thanks.
Mention, and you guys maybe have thought of this, but if there are conservation districts that are members, or if that might be a good target audience for fitting some of these, and then like the rural water folks, there's a whole, you know, group of people who are out there trying to help with access to drinking water in rural areas that might be some good allies.
Good idea. The conservation districts are in Pennsylvania, right, Jen? Are they a Pennsylvania thing?
They are in all states, but
okay.
they sort of sit between government and, I mean, they're kind of government agencies, but they work with a lot of nonprofits and farmers and
okay, great.
Landowners.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Anything else? We have a couple more minutes for objective 1. So I just want to make sure that we're hearing all of your thoughts. Is there anything else?
Yeah,
Are we missing anything?
in New Jersey, you might want to contact the state's farmland preservation program, because they work with, you know, farmers and a lot of other rural interests, and they could probably, you know, provide you with some, you know, both group and individual contacts. So.
Great, thank you. That was Steve talking. Thank you, Steve.
And also, you know, a lot of areas they have, you know, farmers markets, and the people that organize those might, you know, have a good end, you know, to individuals more than groups. But
Great. Okay. Looks like we have some more suggestions in the chat. Carol said, how about the WRA, DRB, mostly water users and water purveyors, private and public energy producers, wastewater, and consultants. Yeah, it's a good idea. Oh yeah, okay. Anything else? What are folks' thoughts looking at this first objective? Any other, are there any activities that we should prioritize as part of this that aren't in here? Are we missing anything else? Are there any partners' voices that we think might be missing in objective 1?
That was one other comment I wanted to make was, at least for us in New York, very much related to soil and water conservation districts are the municipal entities, and they are a huge source of match for us. And, you know, I've never seen a formal way of sort of engaging them through CDRW, but, you know, that's something that has been very, very successful for us. And it seems like those kinds of partnerships would be equally valid throughout the watershed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Rita,
absolutely.
you want to put down, it's the New Jersey Farmland Preservation Program, not soil conservation districts.
So Molly, when you talk about municipal entities, you mean like municipalities, like local towns and cities and stuff like that have been good allies?
Towns, cities, counties.
Okay, great. Such a good idea too, because they may also have matching fund dollars for grants. Absolutely. Oh, okay. What else are folks thinking for this first objective? Got a couple more minutes on this one. You feel like anything is missing in terms of engaging additional stakeholders?
Hey Rita, it's Grant. And forgive me if you're having a little trouble hearing me, connectivity issues, but in terms of vehicles for the coalition, do you feel like the staff is set up in order to do this well? Do we need to create anything to support you achieving the activities and objectives that are here?
Yeah, Sandra, I don't know if you want to take that question, but I could take it if you.
I can jump in. Thanks, Grant. Yeah, this is something that I think, you know, we can, the CDRW staff, there's a lot of list building involved with this to really make sure we have everyone's appropriate context that we already currently, you know, involved with or to conduct that outreach to. So I'd love for us to create, you know, maybe a Google, you know, like a Google spreadsheet that we can share out to our members and ask, you know, for a little bit of help to help populate it, especially if you have relationships with any particular organizations or folks, really any of the categories that we listed out here. We also have an intern that just came on board with us last week. Her name is Revathi, and I know that she's handling some of the list building work in our environmental justice groups and capacity there. But yeah, I think we could definitely use some help there, you know, in terms of list building. If folks are willing and able to help out with that, we can certainly send out a Google Sheets as we kind of, you know, list building first, and then we'll figure out, you know, conducting outreach and formulating partnerships, what I think warrants a separate kind of like a strategy call in terms of like how exactly, you know, what are we engaging them with? What can we offer them? How can we help them? What are their needs, and so on and so forth. So I think, you know, having that workload distributed, you know, alongside with you all would be really helpful.
Do folks have any other thoughts on this first objective before we move on? All right, going once, going twice. All right, so let's move on then. Thank you all for your input. That was really helpful. So for objective 2 and 3, we're going to kind of skip over them. I will read them really quick, but these are mostly internal. And if you want to help to kind of mold this, I suggest that you join our communications work group because that's where a lot of this work is going to be happening. So our objective 2 is to extend the coalition's impact by amplifying member organizations' work and convening partners toward common agendas and policies. So this is re-engaging members, publishing blogs, supporting job openings and events from our coalition members. And actually, if you have any events or job openings that you want promoted, please send them to me. My plug here. Yeah, and finding opportunities to collaborate on action alerts. And then objective 3 is to provide technical assistance, advocacy, and communications training and support to coalition members. So these are some of the perks of joining the coalition. We're going to have different webinars on communications skills and produce material and things of that nature. So if you could go down to objective 4, Kelly. Okay, and for objective 4, I am going to pass it off to Jeff from FUDR, who's going to talk about this objective and the FFMP.
Great. Thank you, Rita. Thanks, Sandra and Kelly and everybody at CDRW for putting this together. So many of you have heard my presentation on FFMP in various forums before, and I will try to keep it as simple as possible and understandable as possible, given that it is a little bit of a complex issue. The overarching point that I hope to convey today is the title of this entire exercise today is watershed-wide planning. Why is the FFMP important for the entire Delaware River watershed? So the FFMP, the Flexible Flow Management Program, is the governing document, the governing program that the City of New York and the 5 decree parties, which include the City of New York and the 4 state governors, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, New York. It is the plan that governs the operations of the big reservoirs up here in the Western Catskills of New York State, and upper portion of the Delaware River Basin. And it has so much to do with the entire watershed. Traditionally, I think it's been viewed as, well, that's just a upper river thing. And FUDR has this really strong, we have multiple constituencies, but one of them is trout anglers. And many of you know that the upper river up here is a world-class wild trout destination. And so we're often identified as such, but this plan, I think, has a much more expansive implications that go beyond the health of the wild trout fishery up here, even though it's hugely important for that. So this has been going on for decades. This FFMP is one of many, many, many reservoir management plans, New York City reservoir management plans. And by the way, those reservoirs are Cannonsville, Papacton, and Neversink. And over the decades, the City of New York and the decree parties, the states, have wrestled with this and negotiated this and talked about this. And I know Carol's on the phone and she has a lot of experience with this too. So Carol, feel free to jump in if I miss anything or you have some additional input. But it's been a long history of negotiation. How do we manage the water in the big reservoirs up in New York State? And essentially it comes down to which way is the water going to go, right? Is the water going to go to the City of New York through underground tunnel system? One of the engineering marvels of the universe, by the way, constructed in the middle part of the last century. Or is it going to come down the river? Are they going to release the water out of the reservoirs from the bottom of these dams? And is it going to come down the river for multiple purposes for the Delaware River, multiple needs? That is a question that we tackle almost every day up here at FUDR and our other conservation partners and our CDRW partners. And over the years, the landscape has changed. The discussion has changed. It has gone in a very positive trajectory. It's no longer just a utilitarian, in my opinion anyway, it's no longer just a utilitarian water engineering plan, right? It's now factoring in multiple watershed needs, multiple watershed benefits, including aquatic habitat and water quality, and ecological flows, water supply. It is an integral piece of watershed management for the entire Delaware River Basin. And that is something that not everyone thinks about the Ffmp in that way, but we try our best to get folks to think about it. An overarching reason why this is so important watershed wide to the whole basin is it forces at a high level watershed managers to come together and talk to each other, right? I mean, if you're going to do holistic watershed management, you've got to have multiple stakeholders talking to each other. And that's what this does through the decree party system. This is the decree parties, again, are the 4 states plus New York City. And by the way, the Delaware River Basin Commission has a role here as well. But it's really important to make a distinguishing identification here, and that is the Delaware River Basin Commission, somebody correct me if I'm wrong here, for 99% of their business, I think, they are the 4 states plus the federal government. I believe the Army Corps is the federal government rep these days. But when it comes to the management of the New York City Basin reservoirs, it's slightly different. It's the 4 states and the city of New York, okay? And then the Delaware River Basin Commission has a facilitating role in a lot of the negotiations around these issues. So that's an important distinction to make. So in the big picture, why is it important for the whole watershed? Because it forces constant conversation about multiple watershed parameter issues among the 4 states and the city of New York. The other big one that people will be familiar with is the management of the salt front that comes out of the Delaware Bay, right? That we get worried about when temperatures get warm down in the Philadelphia area and the salt water from the estuary starts to creep up towards the water intakes, drinking water intakes of Philadelphia and Camden. That's another big reason why it's important to think about the flexible flow management program on a watershed-wide basis, and a big reason why the CDRW, we feel, should adopt this as a priority and should pay a lot of close attention to this. There's other reasons for watershed-wide significance. Water supply, right? There's New Jersey's got a piece of this written right into the Ffmp. They get a certain amount of water supply at their intake near Lambertville. Ecological flows up and down the river. It's an ongoing discussion. The DRBC has actually reactivated something called the Subcommittee on Ecological Flows, of which FUDR and Trout Unlimited, I see Jen is on the call today. Trout Unlimited are formal members of that, conservation partner members. And that subcommittee is studying ancillary issues to the Ffmp. They just we were successful in adopting 2 upper basin policies out of that exercise under the auspices of the Ffmp to control water temperatures up in the trout fishery, which is the upper 80 miles of river up here, and also to regulate the releases from the reservoirs in a way that's a little bit more ecologically protective, right? Over the years, sometimes we have these erratic water releases that cause all kinds of aquatic habitat disruptions, and we figured out a policy amongst this group, this DRBC subcommittee, how we can mitigate that a little bit better to protect the river a little bit better. And now that subcommittee, I think, is kind of huddled behind closed doors and talking about what their next issue is going to be. But all of it is under the auspices of this, again, this flexible flow management program. So the other key thing I need to convey here is there's this ongoing debate about the reservoir management way up here in the Catskills and how that impacts flood mitigation up and down the river. I think prevailing wisdom is that most of that impact is in the upper river. So the reservoirs themselves, just by their very nature, they hold water back, right? But we had the big storms in the early 2000s, 04, 05, 06 up here that really wreaked havoc in our local upper Delaware River region up here and below those dams, and to places like Deposit, New York, and Hancock, New York, and Colchester, New York, right? We feel like there are definitely some flood mitigation mechanics at play here with this plan. And the city of New York recognized that, and the decree parties recognized that after the big floods of the early 2000s. So there are some flood mitigation requirements in the FFMP, but we believe they are very specific to the upper river. We do not believe that down in New Hope, Pennsylvania, for example, that water releases from these reservoirs are having flooding impacts down there, but some people do believe that. And it's kind of a reverse reason why there's watershed-wide importance here. I'm not arguing against myself, but to say that flooding is, we believe, is a localized issue for the FFMP, but there's a discussion out there that it's very controversial and we have to deal with it all the time. So again, it's an area where the CDRW could play a role when those kinds of issues come up. So Sandra told me I had about 10 minutes to talk, and then hopefully if there's questions, we can open it up to conversation, or I guess in the chat box. But in conclusion, I will say that please don't ignore the operations of the big New York City reservoirs up here, because they matter to everybody on this phone every single day, depending on which way that water is going, whether it's going to the city of New York, which is, by the way, it's an out of basin diversion. It's an out of basin diversion to the Hudson River. Obviously, the city of New York's in the Hudson River watershed, or it's coming down our river all the way down to the Delaware Bay. So with that, Sandra, and Rita, I can stop, and if folks have any questions about the FFMP, what it means, what it does, why it's important, I'm happy to try to answer them. And I think there's a few other people on the call today that could help as well.
Do folks have any questions for Jeff before we talk a little bit more about some of the planned actions for 2021?
Can I just add a little? I definitely support Jeff's concern with this. Even though there are no dams on the main stem and you think it's this great wild river, it's incredibly managed every day. And there are Supreme Court dictated target places, one up by Milford, Pennsylvania, one at Trenton that's managed by DRBC. But even with that, there's a lot of issues that are dealt with, and Jeff's right to bring it to you all. One thing I did want to mention is back a while now ago, TNC did a very good report on what the ecological flows should be for different types of streams in the basin, depending on what the geology was, what the slope was, what the fishery was, et cetera. And that never has found its way to policy. And so while there are a lot of studies and a lot of work done on what reservoir releases should be made, there's also the issue of if you have a drought, how much water does the river get versus withdrawals, public water supplies, et cetera. And that's still very open to discussion. The minimum flow in the Delaware is based on an engineering evaluation, Q710. It's not an ecological evaluation. So there's a lot to dive into there. It is very complex, but glad to help however I can.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. That's one thing that I didn't touch on was just to give you an idea just how managed our river is. That 1954 Supreme Court decree that created the decree parties basically said that, yes, the city of New York can expand their water supply system in the Delaware River watershed, but there has to be some consideration for downriver health, aquatic health, water supply needs, that sort of thing. There was a lawsuit, of course. That's what the Supreme Court decree is. And there's a flow target at a place called Montague, New Jersey. I'm guessing many of you know where that is, of 1750 CFS on average daily, right? So when it's anticipated that flow dips below that 1750 at the gauge at Montague, New Jersey, that triggers all kinds of requirements up at the reservoirs to keep that flow at that level. And it's, this, Carol mentioned drought. There's also a drought target as well in Trenton, New Jersey. So with the impacts of climate change, right? I mean, this is just a huge question that, and this plan needs constant revisitation. Right now, we're in the middle of a 10-year FFMP. It started in October of 2017, and there's a whole bunch of issues that need to be studied along the way. And that's happening now. And we're hopeful that we can get some of them, Sandra, we can get the muscle of the CDRW more engaged and as those conversations ensue, because there are going to be some advocacy opportunities there that that we believe need to be represented for those of us who are, work every day to protect the river. So, so I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Do other folks have any other questions or comments about the FFMP? All right. Okay. So for objective 4, essentially, if you want to, Kelly, go back up to objective 4. So this is what we're looking at today. Do folks have any other comments on this objective? So that for this objective 4, it says support efforts to develop a vision for the watershed shared by political leaders and strengthen collaboration beyond political boundaries. So a big part of that is obviously the FFMP. It is a multi-state issue. Also on our list is to amplify efforts aimed at achieving fishable and swimmable waterways for all. So that includes really a lead by American Littoral Society through their Clean Water Roadmap project. Are there anything else in terms of objective 4, things that we are missing for our watershed-wide planning? Things we're missing or communities we're missing? People we're missing?
Hey, Jeff, is there anything else that the membership as a whole can really do to get involved with the FFMP and moving this along a bit? Anything that we're missing in terms of the activities we listed?
I don't think so, but we often fool around with this idea of some sort of CDRW, like subcommittee or whatever you want to call it, Sandra, that, where it would be great to have representatives from each of the states, whether it's the steering committee members or other interested members. We would love to have some sort of subcommittee that's interested in paying attention to this, because it's really hard for us to do that. We're up here in Hancock, New York, right? We're up here in the upper river. We're very focused locally. When stuff comes up on the FFMP that impacts, Southern Jersey or the Delaware Bay, we have a hard time reaching out, identifying what those actions can be, reaching out to organizations that can help. So if there was, I don't know if there's a way, I know it's more work for everybody, but if we could create some sort of CDRW subcommittee, because it seems like stuff comes up. I mean, this is a year-round monitoring effort, right? They're always, I think I can safely say once a month, something comes up under the auspices of the FFMP that could require multi-state attention and the attention of the CDRW and our advocacy voice. So I don't know, that we fooled around with that idea a lot, but we haven't been able to put it together.
Jeff, there is the regulated flow committee that at DRBC that people can now attend by Zoom. So it's a way.
Yes, yeah. And Carol,
Carol, you stole what I was going to say. Is there might be a way to, I think building on Jeff's idea, having some sort of, way to interact with that committee in a more intensive and throughout the basin way through the CDRW. I think that's a really great idea. I think both of them, I think that would be very helpful in getting the coalition's voice involved in the discussion at the decision-making level. And that may also help to kind of spur some of the advocacy pieces that we're talking about as well.
Right. So Carol, I think you would agree with me. So we pay a lot of attention to RFAC, the DRBC, our Regulated Flow Advisory Committee. We go to all their meetings, we make presentations, and it definitely is a good venue, and absolutely we have to pay attention to it. But the whole I mean, Carol, I would be interested, and Jan, I'd be interested because you were involved in your prior life with this, but you know, because of the nature of the Supreme Court decree and the what is often described as ongoing litigation, right? This is ongoing litigation, right? By its very definition, that means, in our opinion, that means secrecy in some ways, right? So a lot of these conversations that go on among the decree parties in the city of New York, we never have access to, right? So we get, so there's, you know, maybe twice a year, there's an RFAC meeting down in Trenton. So we get to peek in then, right? And then we also work our back channels and make, you know, have relationships and make phone calls. And that's how we have to kind of piece stuff together. So I agree that RFAC is a really important venue. What I had more in mind was the advocacy piece on the part of the nonprofits who are CDRW engaged. Is there, you know, we need a little more horsepower there. So I hear you, Jen. We can build RFAC is a good place, and Carol, RFAC, good place to start. We just need a little bit more horsepower to get some more access and to get out in front of some of these issues. We're often very reactive because we just don't get the information in time or at all. So.
I'd like to add, oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, this is Rebecca from the Watershed Coalition of Lehigh Valley. I just want to add quickly that this is a major, major concern of a lot of the watershed groups and conservation folks. The Watershed Coalition Lehigh Valley has experienced some inadvertent mission creep over the last couple of years, well up into the Poconos. And so we now include all of those Pocono, Monroe, and North Watershed associations as well. And one of the main challenges that we're having is that it is incredibly difficult to separate fact from opinion when it comes to the flexible flow management plan and the different parties. And it's really, really challenging. There's a lot of just extreme views that are, you know, that are expressed from, you know, the sky is falling to, you know, the other side. So that I think there's a role here to play in separating fact from interpretation of data, from extrapolation and on into opinion. Does that make sense to you, Jeff?
It does. It definitely makes sense. We're putting out something called a citizen's guide to the Ffmp. Congratulations to us, right? It's an enormous project, right? How do you do that?
Right.
How do you tell an ordinary citizen how the Ffmp works? A lot of that will be focused on the upper river and the trout fishery for our angling constituency. But yes, Rebecca, I agree. This is multiple challenges here. And the first one is to understand the freaking thing, right?
Right. So actually, Sandra, that is not, that's actually not what I'm saying. I'm not talking about ensuring sound science. What I'm really talking about, and maybe Jeff can help me out here, is more what he just said. So maybe you want to say that again, Jeff. It is separating out pure fact. There is a dam here. These are the laws. These are the regulations that are in place. And for example, these are how they have historically been implemented, like just facts,
right?
Information, and then interpretation of that information on the very first level, meaning without anybody going to an extreme scenario. For example, here would be things that they are permitted to do or that are prohibited under current, and here are some narrow interpretations of that. And then moving into, very clearly in levels further away from the pure facts into interpretation and then extrapolation. And again, without going into the weeds here, I'm sure that Carol and Jeff at the very least know what I'm talking about. We have people who have extrapolated very strongly on both directions. I work for Penn, and so I ended up attending a planning consultation meeting during my day job, not as my Watershed Coalition head, with a water authority up in the Lehigh River watershed. And one of the flexible flow things came up, and these guys apparently intend to go to meetings armed and fight for their rights. So this is kind of how an extreme version, and it's very difficult to separate out fact from what is being derived from that fact. And I would love to see a fact sheet that has facts and then another sheet that has something like very low level interpretations. Carol, Jeff, can either one of you, I'm not being particularly articulate, but I literally have 100 people just in our couple county area hanging in on this and participating in conversations. One way that this is handled is Ross McLennan, who's one of our master watershed stewards, has actually begun a series of conversations directly with Paul Rush about this to try to figure this out. So this is just really a need that we have, and maybe one of you guys can make that clearer.
Can I
I'd be happy to share a draft with you, Rebecca. I think the first part of what we have in mind is getting at what you're seeking, which is just some of the how did this happen along the way? How did it change? What does it mean? Where it gets really tough, of course, is we're dealing with water management. And even though we're in a water-rich watershed, right, there are still constraints on water, and there are many stakeholders and many needs. And so that's when you start getting into the area that gets tougher, Rebecca, which is people basically start looking at this, what's in it for me? So I don't know if you were at the big Lehigh River, were you at the big Lehigh River meeting about a year ago? Right now there's an Army Corps feasibility study going on, right, in Congress.
I'm following the whole thing in
right.
agonizing detail. No, I'm delighted that I wasn't at that meeting, because these dudes who I was in this other meeting with told me that they all went there packing heat, a direct quote. And I'm just like, okay, it's not too often that people start carrying arms to meetings over, dams and, flow. But if the coalition and can play a role in that creation and dissemination of pure fact and a fact sheet, and then information about what's happening that's not hysterical, even if there are really hysterical things at stake, that's fine. It's just good to be able to separate out that, because we do have many different groups with different goals, from the rafters and the paddling industry to the fishermen to, whoever. And and I'm a hydrologist, right? So like, I have a couple degrees in this, and I'm having a hard time sorting it out. Yeah. So that's just my 2 cents.
Well, I hear you, and let's try to do that, and we're going to recruit you to help us, okay, Rebecca? The two, that's one example. Lehigh River Management, there's for those who don't know, there's a feasibility study underway, I believe. Carol, you might know more, but to expand the F.E. Walter Reservoir on the Lehigh River, right? That
ecological study going on.
Yeah, automatically.
It's to look at options for meeting some of for the use to modify the management plan for the operation of the reservoir, with the consideration for ecological augmentation or management, as well as possibly water supply management.
Right, so that is going to attract stakeholder engagement, which it did that night, Rebecca, down in your neck of the woods, to the tune of like 1,000 people. Paul Rush was, thinking he had to wear a bulletproof vest, and evidently
yes, he was.
Based on the report there, because you have passionate stakeholders with different interests and different needs. That gets the whole discussion really, intense right out of the gate. A similar issue is the management of Lake Wallenpaupack, right? When hydro came around and that became part of the whole flexible flow management regime, people in the upper basin up here near Hancock, New York, who enjoy the fishery got worried because when they started generating electricity at Lake Wallenpaupack at hydro there, that created more water releases from the lake into the Delaware River, right? Which meant that was augmenting the flow target at Montague, New Jersey, right? And then the people in the upper river were kind of like, hey, what about us? When Wallenpaupack starts pushing water out, all of a sudden we don't get as much water in the upper basin. So it's just another example of how complex this discussion is, and the need for the challenge of addressing everybody's needs. It's really it's difficult. So anyway, yeah, Rebecca, you're recruited. We'll be sharing our document with you. Jen, you're in too. So are you, Carol. Maybe that's the subcommittee right there. Maybe you all just volunteered.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you, Rebecca, for all of your input. Just for the sake of time, I do want to move on to the last bullet point for our watershed-wide planning, which is about fishable, swimmable. If you want to put some more comments about Ffmp, you can go ahead and do that in the chat. Any suggestions that you might have. So I'm going to pass it over to Verna and Steve, who are going to talk about the fishable, swimmable waterways priority.
All right, thank you, Rita, and thank you everybody for being here. The goal of the Clean Water Roadmap is to identify what the current state of the river is, what are the current commitments to improve water quality in the river, and how can those commitments be optimized to address water quality concerns and public access concerns in the near future versus waiting for these programs to get in place. And so we're working with the Water Center at the University of Penn, Pennsylvania, that's doing the actual investigation of the status of the river, the water quality regulations, monitoring, things like that. And they are going to be producing a report which will include the roadmap to clean water in the Delaware River, focused on the 27 miles primarily between Trenton, New Jersey, and down by Chester, Pennsylvania, and how we can improve the water quality and improve public access. And a big part of this project is environmental justice, social justice, economic opportunity, as well as clean water. People are using the river already for primary recreation, for swimming, kayaking, jet skiing, paddleboarding. So, we need to understand what the exact quality of the river is and what we can do to make improvements in the short term, and also to engage the public, the communities in Camden, Chester, and Philadelphia with public access, with water quality, to hear what they have to say about how they want to use the river, where do they want to go to use the river. There's a lot of activity in Philadelphia. Riverfront North Partnership is building new parks. In Camden, there's new parks planned for Pine Point, and in Philadelphia, Graffiti Pier and other areas are being looked at for public open space access, public parks. There's a lot of redevelopment going on in Philadelphia that can provide opportunities. So we want to engage with all the various communities in these cities and hear what they have to say about how they use the river, what they would like, how they would like to use the river or not use the river. So that's the big part of public engagement. We've already hosted 2 webinars with CDRW, the coalition, on the project, and specifically the project in general, and also the recreation element of the first task that is being done. This work is being funded through Penn Foundation, and we have a work group consists of myself, Carol Collier, Verna Harrison, who are also on the call, Tim Dillingham from the American Littoral Society, and Andy Cricken from Moonshot Missions, and Don Baugh from Upstream Alliance. So we're together coordinating this project. We made contacts with many organizations such as Cooper's Ferries Partnership in Camden, Trust for Public Land, City of Philadelphia. So, we have a lot of work to do with public engagement. Everybody knows the work involved, and Rebecca, you're talking about science versus fact, or fact versus opinion, science versus opinion. That's one of the goals of the roadmap project, is to identify what is a common set of facts that we can all agree on with the current state of the river, and communicate that to all the communities in the river. I don't know, Carol or Verna, if you want to add anything.
This is Verna Harrison, and I'm working with American Littoral Society, and our part of this project that Steve just described very well involves the stakeholder outreach component of the actual study being done by the Water Center. And as we've noted in these priorities, is one of the most important pieces is the equity. We're sometimes talking about this project as justice, jobs, and clean water, because we feel really strongly that in the impact of the project goes beyond swimming and kayaking, and the benefits in these cities that are desperately poor is to advance community health and public access and job creations. You hear stories about, and this is basically CSO driven, combined stormwater and the impact. We were talking to the head of the Chester River Stormwater, the Chester Stormwater Authority yesterday, and he was describing the impact on their parks with this pollution. So it's got a lot of points to it. I appreciate the point already raised about working with youth, and we will definitely continue that. I think that anything that anybody can do to give us some advice on how to work directly with watershed communities, so we go beyond just working with organizations, is another one of our goals. And I guess I will just try to respond to one of the questions in the chat with respect to the tributaries. This initial phase will be related to the tributaries as there being a point source. And I don't know, we're hoping that there'll be additional funding so there can be additional monitoring work. Carol, do you want to address that? Because Carol wears a couple of hats in this project.
Yeah, I didn't do a good job retiring, that's for sure. So I'm on the advisory committee for the development of the roadmap, which is just the facts, ma'am type report. And with the original scope, it is just looking at the Delaware River proper. So in modeling of, where bacteria may be coming from, the tributaries are just the input to that analysis. But I think everybody realizes that a lot of the communities recognize the tributaries more than they do the main stem as, the water closest to them. So there is hope to get some additional funding so we can do a similar study, including the tributaries.
Do folks have any other questions for Verna or for Steve about this priority? Okay. So just looking at some of these activities, are there any other, is there anything that we're missing? Are there any other activities that we might want to prioritize or voices that we need to get in the room?
This is Verna. I just want to echo what Steve said. We greatly appreciate the role that CDRW has taken so far in helping us host these webinars. They do relate to, I think, one of your priorities. We are trying to reach a broader audience than the normal environmental organizations. So to that extent, I think we're fitting in that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot of organization and community groups out there, and we're looking forward to engaging with them. Some of them we've already reached through the webinars that have been hosted by the coalition, and like Verna said, the coalition has made the work that we've done so far a lot easier as far as being able to share the information and get it out there and get input. And so we're looking to continue that relationship. And if anybody knows of specific groups that or organizations that would be interested in this project, please let myself or Verna or Carol know. And one of the things that we're particularly focused on is getting beyond organized groups to try to reach individuals, people that may not be, that we were talking like before, may not be with an individual organization, but have has very strong interests in the river. So we're hoping to be able to reach out to them and find places where sites where they may be using the river that are completely undocumented, that may be able to be suitable as a public open space in a park, appropriate river access. So people find their way to the rivers, that's for sure.
What else? Do folks have any other thoughts on the clean water roadmap or fishable, swimmable waterways? All right. I'm not hearing any. Is there any, just to take a look at this one more time, is there any way that we can be more inclusive or equitable when we are working on this?
Verna or Steve, I don't know if either of you want to talk about the recent name change. I know folks were more, probably folks on the call were more familiar with like the Returning to the River. I know you recently changed it to the Clean Water Roadmap.
Yeah, I'll mention that. And I'll also mention I appreciate being able to be part of KIP's work group on the DEIJ work that you all are doing, or we are doing. During our second webinar, which was focused on the recreation use existing and possible of the river, we heard from Danielle Redden at Bartram's Garden and a few others that the name Returning to the River seemed to imply that there had been a voluntary departure from the river by certain communities instead of being basically pushed out and fenced out. And so we really took that to heart, and we've had 2 different calls with Joanne Douglas and Danielle and Adam Hymans from Resource Media to talk about that and what we could do. And what we've decided, since this current phase of the Watershed, the Water Center's study is just the initial phase, that we would simplify things and change the name to Roadmap to Clean Water. And we will be very intentional in the future. AWE has given us some tools that we can use to make sure that the words we select are the appropriate words. So thanks, Sandra, for bringing that up. I know everybody gets so many emails, and so I'd started to use returning to the river roadmap with a footnote, and then that got a little clumsy. So please watch out for roadmap to clean water, and we're focused right now on the areas, probably near shore areas along Chester, Camden, and Philadelphia, and we will hopefully down the road get something a little snappier.
Verna.
And if anyone wants to get information about the roadmap project, the first webinar is posted on the coalition's YouTube channel, so you can see and go into more detail if you're interested.
Just thought of that. I know this isn't the target audience for the roadmap work, but it's something I've thought about before, and it just seems like it slips through the cracks is that there are quite a few boating clubs on the Delaware that have long histories, and I always wonder if anyone is engaging them. And I think it ranges from like from the rowing associations on the Schuylkill to a lot of really neighborhood level boating clubs where people have access and put their boats in, and may not always be the kind of use we want to encourage the most, but it just occurs to me as another audience that at least, at points in the past when I thought about it, that they seem to be missed in a lot of the work that we do.
That's a very good point. We reached out to some of them. Patrick Starr gave us a list of others, and I've talked with the Coast Guard folks, I've talked with the pilots folks, and I hope that we will actually maybe working with the Pilots Association do some public outreach to some of those boating groups. So thanks, Jen. That's a really good point.
And also along the similar lines is I don't know that we've ever engaged the port communities on the Delaware the way I know when I was with the estuary program. Some of the estuary programs have huge partnerships with their ports and their the navigation folks, and that piece of business and industry that I think hasn't been as engaged.
Yeah, good. Another really good point. I've had one conversation with Lisa Hillner with the maritime community, and another one, as I said, with the Pilots Association, and we have a call set up in February to continue that. But these ideas are, I don't mean to just come back and say, yeah, we're doing it. They're good ideas, and we're beginning to do it.
And the boating community is particularly important because they may be boating, but they can also be water skiing or wading or just outright swimming. So there's a lot of other activities that occur with that. And the Independent Seaport Museum late last year hosted a webinar on commercial boat traffic and recreation in the Delaware, and they had representatives from a variety of stakeholder groups, and it was great to hear because it's particularly the commercial boaters or the commercial ships people were saying that they are happy to share the river. They don't see the river as theirs only. Nobody else should be on the river. It's just that they and also recreational boaters need to be responsible and understand the tides and the shipping and all the other aspects that go into it. So but I didn't hear recreational boaters are a pain in the neck or something, they shouldn't be out there. It was very welcoming and supportive, so, and very open to working together further. So.
And I think some of the members of those clubs have really long histories, in their families and their neighborhoods and tell great stories about the recovery of the river. And so there's a very close connection.
Thanks. I may get back in touch with you, and I know Tim's been meaning to. Maybe we can pull out a couple of the people in particular.
we have a couple more minutes. Do folks have any other thoughts on the fishable, swimmable? Just looking through these bullet points, is anything missing? Can anything be strengthened?
You know, maybe the only thing that I would just mention is that the regulatory term in the Clean Water Act, fishable and swimmable, is very important in many different ways. And I guess it's obvious from our description, we're taking, this is terrible saying, but I'll borrow from Andy Cricken, we're taking a bite of the elephant here. And how this relates to your overall watershed-wide priorities is that, you know, we're kind of in the middle. You know, the northern waters may be a little better, the southern waters may be a little better. So, you know, let's connect this and start with the little bite of the elephant that relates to the equity issues of the cities along the edges.
You know, this is mostly like Camden, Philadelphia area. So I think, you know, there's definitely an equity lens that can work with this as well, because, you know, it's largely communities of color. And
absolutely.
Yeah, varying types of economic status within that region as well. All right. Do folks have any other thoughts or questions or comments or anything? I just want to make sure that everyone is being heard. Oh, Linda says that the new Kramer Hill Waterfront Park in Camden will open in the fall and has a decent fishing plaza. That's an excellent thing. All right. All right, well, I don't hear anything. Sandra, are we okay with finishing up a little bit early since we're in pretty good shape?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Rita, you want to go into next steps, like upcoming work groups and such?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of next steps, CDRW staff will be sharing the final work plans with the full membership after we polish them up, after all of our calls are done. And if you want to get more involved in any of the issues we discussed today, our lead organizations can indicate their contact info in the chat box. So Jeff, if you didn't put your email in there, and Steve and Verna, put your contact info in the chat box so folks can follow up with you. Our next communications work group call is on Tuesday, February 2nd at 11 a.m. So that's if you want to go more in depth into objectives 2 and 3, which we didn't talk too much about. There's a lot of communications activities in there. And if you want to be part of that, again, our communications work group is February 2nd at 11 a.m. So you could reach out to me if you want to get that calendar invite. And then finally, our virtual Hill Week is going to be taking place in March. We're going to be meeting with congressional offices throughout the Delaware River watershed, and it's scheduled through March 8th to March 12th. So mark your calendar, March 8th through March 12th, and you may see that registration coming through your email. So feel free to sign up for that. We're going to be meeting with Congress about these priorities. So does anybody else have anything that they want to say before we conclude today? All right, great. Well, thank you all. I hope that you have a good, excellent rest of your Friday and a good weekend. And register for Hill Week. The link is in the chat. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.